Shalom, shalom, boker tov, shavua tov, chodesh tov. Wishing everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful month. As we continue learning our Sefer chinuch, learning the 613 Mitzvot in the Torah, we're going to learn a bit today about the laws in regards to slavery, since this is appropriate leading up to Pesach, the holiday celebrating freedom of slaves. So there's many mitzvot, as you can see here, many mitzvot that we're going to look at, and quite complex. But I want to start with this. Why are we even talking about slavery in the Torah? Right? Of course, we have the slavery that is associated with the Israelites in Egypt and Mitzrayim, where we commemorate the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus and the freeing of those slaves. But we also have the assumption in the Torah that Jews were going to own slaves in thousands of years ago. And how should those slaves be treated? Now, the Rambam, Maimonides, famously teaches that the Torah is given in its own unique time period. And so there are ideas there which will not resonate for our modern sensitivities. However, those mitzvot are there to bring progress in its own era. And then Torah Shebal Peh, the Talmud is in place, the halachic process, to bring about progress, right? Because halakha itself translates as progress, going forward. And so it would have been impossible to abolish certain practices 3,300 years ago, such as slavery, right? The entire economy was built on a model of slavery. In fact, it was only until about 150 years ago that we abolished slavery in America. So we see here that the Torah is dealing with adding dignity to systems that still needed to exist during that time period. And one of those systems was, in fact, slavery. So how do we ensure in an ancient system where this type of indentured servitude still exists, that there is dignity and morality in the system itself? And if you look at the code of law just before the Torah, literally historically right before, the code of Hammurabi, what's the crime if you killed a slave? The crime is a monetary crime. Why? Because a slave is not a human being. A slave is property in the code of Hammurabi. So if you kill the slave, you owe money, right? Then comes the Torah and brings progress and says if you kill the slave, that is a capital crime. That is a human being who is in indentured servitude, but if you kill them, then that is the highest capital crime you could do. So let's see some of the many laws that emerge in the Torah around the Eved. So first we look at 42. In 42, Mitzvat Din Eved Ivri, the law of the Hebrew bondservant, because it says in Exodus 21:2, Ki tikne eved ivri, when you buy this Hebrew servant. And the chinuch then writes that this means we should do for them all the things about which we were commanded, remembering that we ourselves were slaves in Egypt, that you send him free in the 7th year, right? You can't keep this worker forever. They go free in the 7th year, and even less if the Yovel emerges, the Jubilee year emerges, where everyone gets their freedom, or by deducting money, or through the death of the owner who didn't have a son to inherit, or to treat the servant with the bored earlobe, also according to his law. And so various ideas of how this servant gets their freedom. It cannot be permanent. And the chinuch continues, we were obligated to have mercy on someone who was under our ownership and to treat them with kindness. This is a very big chidush, a big insight, right? That in the ancient world, I mean, even in America 170 years ago, you own a slave, the idea of being merciful to them is not the ethos. The teaching here throughout that, okay, in this archaic system of having slaves, you must treat them with dignity. Or as it says in the Gemara Psachim 88b, kana eved, kana rav. If you acquire a servant, you've acquired a master. That your obligation to treat this person with dignity, to treat your slave like a master is the obligation. Then we go on to mitzvah 43, mitzvat yi'ud shel ama ivriya, marital designation of the Hebrew maidservant to protect the dignity of this woman who was caught into indentured servitude. Mitzvah 44, mitzvat pidyon ama for Ivriyah, also the redemption of the Hebrew maidservant. Mitzvah 45, shelo yimkor ama Ivriyah hakone otam miyad a'av. That it says in Exodus 21:8, he shall have no power to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt faithlessly with her, the protection of this woman in this system here. And then mitzvah 46, shelo ligroa she'er kesut v'ona, not to withhold from one's wife, in this manner, her rightful due, the she'er, the kesuta, the ona, these basic rights that she has here. So we see this idea that we could not abolish slavery in the Torah, but we want to maintain the highest dignity to the extent that if you've acquired a servant, you've ultimately acquired a master. Now, part of what we're dealing with here is, in today's time, is not only the need to abolish slavery, where there's still tens of millions of slaves in the world, those working in fields, then there's sex slaves, those who are trapped and worked as sex slaves, just horrible things. But in addition to modern day slavery, which we as Jews have a unique obligation to fight, not only because we were slaves in Egypt and were brought out, liberated, and we want to emulate God who liberates slaves, but also because of these many mitzvot in the Torah around ensuring the dignity of slavery. One such a system exists. Our goal is to abolish slavery, but while it exists, our goal is to enhance the dignity of slaves, to ultimately move them towards liberation. And even more, in addition to the slavery, to look at modern systems that are mass incarceration, and how mass incarceration is a form of slavery. In fact, today there are more black men in prison system in America than were enslaved historically in American slavery. I will post that link below so you can read more about this, and how the new Jim Crow, as it's often called, that the system of mass incarceration is another form of akin to slavery. That in fact we've never addressed these major issues of racial injustice born out of slavery. That, as many have suggested, the only reason America became a superpower in the world was because we had the economic leverage of slavery and mass. And so we have to address this fact that America has never apologized, even more than apologized, ever addressed the wrongs that have come with slavery. And actually, that's a good segue into Mitzvah 481, which has to do ultimately with reparations. Mitzvah 481, Shelo l'shaleach eved ivri rekam kishayetze chofshi, not to send away a Hebrew manservant empty-handed when he goes free. Right? That when a slave is sent free, it says in the Torah, Deuteronomy 15:13, V'chi teshalchenu chovshi me'imach, lo teshalchenu rekam. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. This is true for prisoner re-entry, that when prisoners re-enter society, if they don't have skills, if they don't have job opportunities, if they're not given funds to survive, the recidivism rate will remain as high as it is, which is a big shunda on America, a big shame on America, how high the recidivism rate is. And we can learn here as well that when there is a servant in this form, and they are set free, that they should be sent with funds. Because actually we know, I believe that the Eved Ivri model, the slavery model, this will sound a little strange, but is actually relevant as a new model as a response to mass incarceration. That rather than ruin people's lives and lock them away where they can't get skills, they're not in society, they're torn away from work and from family and all these things, that we should enable work for these individuals so that they can work and be compensated and give work back to society like the Eved did. But also here we see the mitzvah of slave reparations. Right, that in America we haven't addressed slavery yet, and part of that is an economic injustice issue intertwined with the racial injustice issue. And the mitzvah 481, Shelo l'shaleach eved ivri rekam k'sheyetze chofshi, that we can't send someone out free. That if you have incarcerated someone, if you have enslaved a people for hundreds of years, even 1 year, that you can't send them away empty-handed. So we need to address slave reparations in America. This is clearly a halachic obligation, that the only way that Americans were able to get ahead in the way we did as a society, the white establishment was able to get ahead because of what we took as free labor from black Americans, those who were brought over from Africa as slaves. And so Mitzvah 481, that that you can't send them away empty-handed. Then Mitzvah 482 goes even further. Mitzvah 42, Mitzvah ha'anek eved ivri, right? The precept of giving a bonus, a financial bonus, to a Hebrew manservant at his discharge. That this eved, this servant, this person coming out of slavery should not only be compensated, they shouldn't go empty-handed, but they should leave with a bonus so that they can not only survive, but be compensated, and that they can thrive in society after that. Okay, so what have we seen so far? We have seen that slavery could not be abolished in the Torah's time, but we move it towards dignity, where you have to treat your servant like they're a master, a big difference from the ancient societies. And then once they can't permanently be slaves, once they're freed, we have to send them away with financial benefits and even a bonus. Okay, then we see we can't even give them horrible work. If you look at Mitzvah 344, Shelo na'avod be'eved ivri avodat bezoyin kamo avodat kanani, that we can't give this type of slave horrific work, because it says here, whoever buys a Hebrew servant is as one who buys a master for himself. Kol hakone eved ivri kakone adon la'atzmo, right? That I believe the halacha back in the Talmud is that if there's only one pillow in the house, you have to give it to the slave, not to yourself. Many ideas like this. Why? Because midat chesed v'rachamim v'yitrachek memidat hachzariut hara'ah. Right? Because that a person should train themselves in loving kindness and in mercy and in compassion and move away from achzariut, from cruelty. You see, the chinuch goes on, so that it's possible that someone may happen to buy him or one of his sons, that one should remember that one could themselves become a slave one day, and they or their sons may be bought, their children may be bought, and if they sin, should perhaps make this happen upon them. That when he treats his servant with respect, he will undoubtedly entertain this thought, and with this thought, he will take care not to sin towards God. So we remember here that it's not only our historical consciousness that we were slaves in Egypt, that we remember the dignity of the oppressed, but also that we one day again may be in such a situation, and we should, as we call karma or schar va'onesh, we should remember that there, in a just world, what goes around comes around. And so we should treat these people in such a just manner. Okay, now lastly, we'll look at 568. 568, this is a very big deal, as it comes around to asylum seekers, African asylum seekers in Israel today. Mitzvah 568, Shelo lahachzir eved shabarach me'adonav mechutz la'aretz la'eretz Yisrael, not to return a slave who fled from their master abroad into the land of Israel, right? We may not return a runaway. We may not return a runaway. Someone who is seeking refuge, who is seeking asylum, who has run away from their master, run away from persecution or oppression, we may not send them back, right? Deuteronomy 23:16, explicit, Lo taskir eved el adonav, you shall not give a slave back to their master. They escaped, they're free. And it says over there in the Talmud, we're not to return them to their servitude under any circumstance. We have to give them a get cherut, a certificate of liberation. That is an inspiring way to think of our work in the world today, to give a get cherut. A get cherut is a certificate of liberation. That's our work as Klal Yisrael in the world, is to give out these gittin, these divorce documents towards cherut, right? Obviously, towards, God forbid, someone who is trapped in a marriage unfairly and can't get out of the marriage, where she's trapped in because of the gender inequalities. that come from the system of Gittin. There's a get cherut, but also here in regards to slavery, that our obligation when someone flees is to make sure that they have this liberation. And so we see here in Mitzvah 568 that when someone flees from oppression, we may not send them back. And God forbid Israel sends back tens of thousands of asylum seekers who can very well be integrated into Israel. And so too, those coming out of prison, who our obligation is to ensure they could re-enter society. God forbid we allow such a high recidivism rate where they can't properly integrate. And then lastly, Mitzvah 569, Shelo lahonot eved zeh haboreach me'adonav mechutza la'aretz le'eretz Yisrael, not to oppress the slave who flees from their master abroad into the land of Israel. That we see here, once again, from Deuteronomy 23:17, Imcha yeshev bekirbecha b'makom asher yivchar, that he shall dwell with you in your midst in the place which he shall choose, where it is best for him. You shall not wrong him. But once they have fled, our job is, thank you, Shevachaya, once they have fled, our obligation is to give them refuge. Many people are seeking refuge today. This is what leaving Mitzrayim is about. We're leaving our narrow places. We're leaving oppressive relationships. We're leaving bad work situations. We are leaving physical oppression or psychological oppression. And historically, we remember that God is the liberator, and imitatio Dei, halachta b'drachav, we imitate God to liberate ourselves, to liberate others. And we see here that when it comes to the avdut, the slavery, that we are to do this today as well. Now, my teacher, Rabbi Saul Berman, points out that the 5 pesukim in the Torah, the 5 verses in the Torah that command that we remember Yetziat Mitzrayim, the 5 verses in the Torah that command that we remember leaving Egypt, and next to each one, he says there is an action. Next to one of them is Shabbat, right? Remember you left Egypt, and now you should do Shabbat. Why? Because Shabbat is about worker justice. You can't work your worker. Shabbat is about animal welfare. You can't work your animal. Shabbat is about environmental justice. You can't work the land. Shabbat is about taking care of your family and taking care of the self, not working ourselves. Then there's a pasuk about remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim. Next to it is the mitzvah of emancipating slaves. Then we see the mitzvah to remember leaving Egypt, and next to it is including the poor and the immigrant in the holiday joy. Then we see a verse about remembering we left Egypt, and next to it, protecting the legal rights of the vulnerable. And fifthly, we see a verse around remembering the Exodus, and next to it, the mitzvah of tithes, of economic support. So Rabbi Saul Berman, my teacher, who says these 5 verses in the Torah, reminding us of the mitzvah of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering we left Egypt. Next to it is an action, the mitzvah of Shabbat, the mitzvah of emancipating slaves, the mitzvah of including the poor and the immigrant in holiday joy, the mitzvah of protecting the legal rights of the vulnerable, the mitzvah of tithing, of economic support to those who are poor. So, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote in The Religious Basis of Equality of Opportunity, the Segregation of God, which is found within the Insecurity of Freedom, page 97. He says, we are all pharaohs or slaves of pharaohs. It is sad to be a slave of a pharaoh. It is horrible to be a pharaoh. Daily we should take account and ask, what have I done today to alleviate the anguish, to mitigate the evil, to prevent humiliation? Let there be a grain of profit in every man. So Heschel is saying here, in today's times, we have 2 opportunities. Today, will I be a slave or will I be a pharaoh? Both are horrible. It's horrible to be a slave, to be oppressed. But it's even more horrible to be a pharaoh, Heschel says. And this binary is one way to view our role. In what way today am I supporting injustice and oppression? Am I holding up modern day slavery and the likes? And how am I going to fight that? And so today, there is indeed slavery. There are indeed tens of millions of modern-day slaves. But even more than that modern-day slavery, there are many forms of oppression which resemble slavery. Those who are stuck in situations who can't escape, right? Those who are making minimum wage or below minimum wage in a world where you can't exist, you can't live without making a living wage, right? The living wage, the amount that you need to get the cheapest bus or subway fare, the amount you need to buy the cheapest food, right? The cheapest childcare, the cheapest rent, right? If you're making below this living wage, you can't make it. You are essentially an indentured servant who's working for $6 an hour, $5 an hour, $5 an hour, even $10 an hour, or you can't make it. And so these mitzvot here in the Torah, 42 to 46, 344 to 348, 481 to 482, 534, 568, 569, we should look at the intricacies of each of them. They are geared towards remembering that we were slaves in Egypt and now we are free. And they are geared towards a historical consciousness that says when oppression and injustice have not been eradicated yet, and it can't be eradicated now, that we should still enhance the dignity of those who are trapped in that. Those who are trapped in that. And so while we can't wipe out the entirety of sex slavery today, we can enhance the dignity of those who are sex workers today in many, many ways. So too, while we can't simply move everything towards a living wage today, even though we should work for it, we should ensure those who are making less are treated with dignity and have their full rights. So as we move towards Pesach, may we all have the bracha of finding the various ways where we are like slaves today, where we are like slaves and we are trapped, so we should find our freedom, finding ways where others are like slaves today, that we can work towards their freedom. And also find the ways that we are like Pharaoh, the ways today that we are someone who leads towards the oppression or indignity of others, who support systems that lead towards indignity or oppression of others, and move away in our own personal practice, our consumption and production that enable those systems, that God willing one day we should all be free, where we move towards the Yovel, the Jubilee year, where all achieve their freedom. May we all be blessed towards our freedom and towards being agents of change for others' freedom. God bless.